Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In the previous video, we saw what formulas and functions are in OmniStudio and how we can use them to transform our data. We explored some basic functions and introduced ourselves to a very powerful function using which custom Apex methods can be invoked from OmniStudio. We also explored what callable interface in Apex is and how to implement the same. The current video is a continuation of the previous one, and I would highly recommend you to check out the previous two videos if you haven't already in order to understand this video. Today we are going to make use of all the previous acquired knowledge and finally learn how to call a custom function in OmniStudio with the help of a demo. So let's dive in. Let's have a look at our problem statement here. The demo is based on the same problem statement. We are given a string input and we have to split it into substrings based on a character. Split is not recognized as a function in DataRaptor formulas. If you have ever tried to use it, you would know. We need to create a custom function to achieve this and invoke the same from DataRaptor Formulas tab. Before moving on, I would like to draw some parallels between Apex map and the JSON format of data sharing. On the left hand side, I have a JSON. Let's name the JSON as args, and we can convert the same JSON into a map in Apex, and the same is given on the right hand side of the screen. As you can see, we can completely represent the given JSON into a map in Apex, because map can be a combination of key value pairs where key can be object and the value can also be objects. But JSON, if you see, is specifically a key value pair of a string and an object. On the left hand side, that is the key value of a JSON is always going to be a string value. And on the right hand side, that is the value part of key value pair is always going to be an object, or it can take any form. Two very basic methods when it comes to maps is the map name dot get method, where we need to put in the key to get the value corresponding to the particular key that we have supplied. And in the similar manner, we can put a value on a specific key of the map using the dot put method. Let's move on. In order to understand it better, let's try to understand this custom split function that we are going to write in order to achieve this particular requirement. So the split function is going to take as input a list of objects, and in return, after processing, it's going to give a map of string and string. That is basically a JSON format object. Let's see this with the help of a demo. I have logged into my developer org, and this is the dev console, and I have opened up the execute anonymous window, and let's walk you through the code that we are going to write to achieve the splitting of the given input. So this is the split function. It's taking as an argument a list of objects, and the return type is going to be a map of string and a string. In the first line, we are simply initializing, or rather declaring, a result which is a map of string and string, and we are going to return the same when we are done processing and when the function terminates. ToSplit is basically the argument, the first argument, which is the string that needs to be splitted. Say for example, this is our string, and we are expecting the input to be in a specified manner, so that from this arguments, the string on the 0th index, that is the very first string, is the string that we need to split. Moving on, the very next string in the arguments list or the array should be the splitter. In our case, it's going to be a space, because if you see in the input string, there are spaces, and we are going to make use of the same to split this particular string into substrings. Now we are defining a split list, and we are using the native split method of Apex, and we are passing the splitting character, and in return it's going to give us a list of substrings after splitting. In this section of the code, we are simply generating the required format of the return type, that is a map of string and string. We are iterating through the list of split list, taking the size as the limit. And let's just keep aside this if statement and the block for now, and let's try to understand what we are doing in the else part. So in the result, we are just putting, since result is a map, so we, as discussed previously, we need to use this put method, and we need to specify the key and the value. And we are simply creating a map here to return at the end. Alright, so let's go ahead and try to see how the output is coming. Okay, so we are creating a list of object as input, and we are using the add method to add two strings one by one in this input array or list, and we are simply calling the split function with the required input, and we are printing it on the console log. Let's execute it. As you can see, we have got a list, or rather a key value pair, a map of string and string, with a key that we have created in our code, split 0, split 1 and split 2, and the values are Mr., John and Doe. Let's try to understand the if block now. if we go back to the code, you would be able to see that in the if statement, we are checking if the argument size is greater than the current count of the for loop plus 2. If it is 2, then we are going to simply generate an output map with split plus I, and if it is greater than 2, then we are going to use the subsequent substrings as the key of the values, key value pairs. To understand this, let's try to run it again, passing 2 extra strings in the input. We would add a star as a string and a hash. So in total, we are now having an array of 4 strings. This is the first one, the string that we need to split. Second is the character, and third and fourth are going to work as a key. Let's try to execute it. Debug only, and as you can see, this type strings that we have provided are now being used as a key of the key value pair. I hope you understood this. Let's move ahead with our presentation. So now that we have understood how the split function is going to work, we need to understand what is going to happen when we are going to call or make a call to the function that we have written in Apex. Let's see with the help of an example again. We go to developer console, we close this, and this is the class custom function implementation that is going to implement the callable interface, and this is going to enable us to call this particular class from OmniScript. Let's try to understand the code first. We are implementing the call function that is there in callable interface, and it is expecting 2 parameters. The first one is a string action, and the second one is the arguments. Now please note this, that the arguments, the args is basically going to be the JSON that we are passing from OmniScript to our Apex code. And there is a particular format of this arguments JSON, which looks something like this. So let's consider the name of the JSON which is coming to our Apex is args, that is args, and it is going to look something like this. We will have many things coming in this JSON, but what we are concerned with is the input and output, or maybe the options. In this current example, we are not going to use options, so we are only going to discuss the input and the output. So if you see, input is the key, and this right here is going to be the value. Now if you look closely, the value itself is a JSON, is a key value pair of objects. Okay. Similarly, we have output, and it is again having an inside node which is result, and we need to override this result node in order to send back data to the OmniStudio. So for getting the data, we are going to get this input, and then we are going to fetch the list or whatever input it is from the arguments key, and we are going to set the result node of output key. Let's see how it works. So when we are receiving the args, we are getting, since args is a map, we need to get the values based on the keys. So for the input key, we are going to receive the arguments. Alright, for the output keys, if we put in the output key in the get method, we are going to get the output. And similarly for the options. Now we could have called the actual methods right here, but we are not doing that because we don't want to overload the functions with all of this data. So we are simply passing it into a method which is going to make the necessary invocations based on conditions. Let's see how it goes. So the invoke method is taking as an input the action, that is the string, which is going to determine which particular actual method is going to be invoked. This is the input. Input is basically a map of string and object, which is basically a JSON. Output is again a map of string and objects, which is a JSON, and the same goes with options. Now on receiving these values, invoke method is going to iterate over an if-else statement, or going to use a switch case on the method name and find out what particular actual method we need to invoke in this particular scenario. So if the method name corresponds to split, then we are simply going to call the split function and pass the required arguments. How we are getting the arguments here? So as you can see in this particular slide, we have now got this part when we did args.get input. So now we have this part of the JSON. Now this is not the actual input. The actual input is this right here. And how do we get to the actual input? We have to again do inputs.get, and this time we have to pass this key, arguments, and this by default is going to be a list of objects. All of these things are predetermined, it is in the design itself, and we have to make use of the same. These are predefined. We are simply going to take the arguments, which is a list of objects, and we're going to pass it to the split function, and whatever the split function is returning, in our case it's returning a map of string and string, we are simply going to assign it to the result node of the output. So if you see, output is a map, and we are simply putting one of the node value here, and the node is result. I hope it makes sense. So let's move ahead and see this in action. We are simply going to create a DataRaptor transform Let's name it as custom function, and we are going to use a transform interface type, and let's save. Okay, so the input JSON is going to be something like this. We need to use the input key, and we are going to pass a list of two strings. The first one is the string that we need to split, and the second one is the splitter itself. All right, let's copy it to the preview section as well, or it is already there. Okay, now in the formulas we are going to add one formula, and we are going to call the function. Let's ignore the condition and whatever appears automatically. And the format, as we discussed in the previous video, is going to be like this, where we need to first provide the name of the class, then we need to pass the action that we want to happen, that is split the method name, the actual method name, and then we have to pass in the input using the merge fields. And let's take it in as an output, and whatever output you are putting it in formula result path, you have to map it to an output JSON path, else you won't be able to see the results. So let's map output with output only. And now mappings are in place, formula is in place. Let's check if it's working or not. And it's working as expected. We are getting a JSON where output is the master node, and the value is itself a JSON object, and we are getting the split part as Mr. John Hento. So this is how we use the custom functions, and how we invoke it from OmniStudio, and how we send the data back and access it in OmniStudio. If you found this video helpful, please like and share this video with your friends. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.